Windsor Plywood in French Creek specializes in hard-to-source interior and exterior home finishing products, including flooring, doors, and moldings. Windsor Plywood French Creek carries high-quality, responsibly sourced products and are committed to providing outstanding value and personalized one-on-one service to all of our customers: homeowners, do-it-yourselfers, renovators, builders, designers, craftsmen, and contractors. Regardless of the type or size of your project, Windsor can help you bring your vision to life from start to finish. Let Windsor Plywood in French Creek help you with your renovation, new build, or building project. Call 752-3122.
You're listening to Non-Partisan Hacks, the podcast about good government from the local level on up. I'm Joel Grenz.
And I'm Sean Wood. We're two Parksville councillors who believe good government doesn't have to come with bad theatre.
Today we're excited to have a conversation with someone who's seen local government from multiple angles: planner, councillor, and regional board chair.
Our guest is Tyler Brown, now in his second term on Nanaimo City Council and serving on the Regional District of Nanaimo Board. He's helped lead big moves on park expansions, transit, and hospital funding, and he's been pushing the province to modernize the Local Government Act so councils can actually be more nimble.
We'll get into what it's like to chair a regional board, how to keep staff-council relations healthy, what to do when public meetings get heated, and where he thinks the system itself could use an update.
Before we jump in, a quick note: this podcast represents our own views and the views of our guests. It doesn't represent the official position of the City of Parksville, Regional District of Nanaimo, or any other public body.
Or Nanaimo, for that matter. And it's rainy out today, so we're recording in the wood kitchen with a wood stove. It's getting a little warm in here with that wood stove, Sean. And I think I smell bread in the oven.
That is what you smell. I think I can say all in-person guests of the show go home with freshly baked, organic, salt-flaked bread. So, Tyler Brown, you will be going home with a few of those loaves for yourself and your family tonight.
Excellent. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and welcome. Thanks for coming on the show, Tyler.
I'm really happy to be here, so thank you for inviting me.
I'm thinking back to when Sean and I first got elected and set up a coffee with you, and you were gracious enough to spend some time with us to give us some of the ropes for the role that we were taking on there on council, being totally new to the thing, and that was very much appreciated that you did that at the time.
You guys seemed like two awesome guys that got elected, so I was happy to have you buy my coffee and speak with you and listen to you. So,
Tyler, you were like a superstar to me at the time, because I was like, I wonder what it's like being a chair of a regional board. That sounds like a gigantic job. I would watch some meetings. I'm like, man, he's really good at that. And so when we had breakfast with you at the restaurant, the coffee shop that's no longer there, really appreciated your time there. And I think Joel and I were taking notes like crazy on that one.
Yeah, Sean doesn't collect baseball cards or have posters of hockey players on his wall. He's got like regional district chairs.
Taking his job seriously, all right.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you've, as mentioned, you're on council, but you've also had a day job as well, working essentially with councils in this role of being a planner. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Whoa, fire alarm's going off. Oh, that must be the bread. The bread's ready.
That's the bread alarm.
Right.
The promised
that's
bread.
how live we are as the bread is coming out of the oven. Do you want to talk a little bit about the stages that you went through from being a staff member for local government to being elected to local government, and why or how you made that jump?
Yeah, sure. I think at the end of the day, I've just been fortunate to have opportune moments present themselves. Going back just over a decade, or a little over a decade, I was really fortunate enough to get a part-time planning job at the Regional District of Nanaimo in their current planning department, and actually it was a planning technician job, and it was only originally a 2-month contract that within a few months converted into a permanent planner job, which I felt very fortunate, because at that time, just with the economy, they weren't handing out local government jobs like they are now. There wasn't the same capacity challenges with hiring. And within a few years, was very fortunate to be asked if I would apply for a role at the time that was around intergovernmental relations and special projects, dealing a lot with Indigenous governing bodies. And I took some time to think about it and ultimately accepted that position. And it was through that exposure that I got, a lot of good exposure to politics and intergovernmental relations and how things were happening behind the scenes. And at the same time, sort of as that was happening, and a good chunk of them were on the board, Nanaimo City Council was just in pure chaos. They were having, the meetings were sort of national news at times. It was resulting in a very divided community.
And you're like, I want to get into that.
No, I actually, the original impulse was, I want to find someone I can support the next election.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And as that time went on, I started to think to myself, like, there was one particular bad meeting actually at the RDN. As a staff member, I became really enthralled with it, even back when I was a planning tech, and started attending every meeting. I was very interested. I'd watch all the council meetings. It just kind of ignited a passion in me that I didn't know existed prior to that. Yeah, there was just one meeting where it was a September before, 2 Septembers, I guess, before the election. And it was just so bad. I watched the decision making, and it was so bad that I just kind of said, okay, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And it was sort of an impulse, and that impulse just never went away. And about that December, January, I thought, okay, time to take it seriously, and started putting the pieces together. And, I'm very thankful that I did have that impulse, but also I think because of the way the council was and the community was divided, being divided because of the council antics, it created an opportunity for myself and for some other people that opened the door for sort of non-traditional candidates in Nanaimo.
Sure.
And I think that the election results showed that, and very fortunate to be on 2 sort of back-to-back councils that don't have those same sort of antics that were present. So
For sure. Yeah, I don't, for the people who don't know all the details, and I don't know all the details either, but Nanaimo Council was known nationally to be in a lot of chaos. There were, I think, threats on council, physical threats, and I don't know what all went on. I guess we don't have to talk about the details, but it was in really bad shape. And so obviously you were elected to Nanaimo Council, and then obviously appointed to the Nanaimo Regional District Board as well from then.
Yeah, and a good chunk of our first term, at least initially, was everyone referred to righting the ship. That's the goal of council. That was kind of the narrative, righting the ship. And yes, of course, there was some righting the ship that needed to occur, but that's ultimately not why local governments exist. They don't just exist to be a ship
to be righted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's about setting a course, and yes, you need to have people working together to do that. But then ultimately, you need to decide. As a council, and that's fundamentally a council role, is where are we going and how we're going to get there. And staff help you figure out that second part. But it's that first part that is fundamentally the council's role, and why people are elected is, okay, where are we taking this thing? What are we trying to achieve? And I think we after that initial writing, it's kind of like, okay, guys, now what? And so we've been figuring that out.
On the writing of the ship piece, before we move on, and was it merely being elected as a new council with new voices and not wanting to go in there to do the same kind of antics? Was that enough to right the ship, or did you have to right the ship in other ways once you got there?
Yeah, I think an element of just being fresh bodies and people that can get along. Yeah, that really went a long way. But no, there were structural issues that need to be corrected. There was a staffing complement that had been hollowed out quite significantly at the middle manager level. There were certain positions that were just sort of underpaid for the amount of portfolio they had. So very quickly there was a staffing review, structural review that by a third party that recommended some changes. So that required some investment. Also, when it came to project delivery and service delivery, there had been, this wasn't just on that one particular council. There had been a history. Everyone always talks about fiscal management as something that produces 0% budgets. But fiscal management is ultimately, are you taxing for the resources and the desires of the community? And are you doing so responsibly?
Yeah.
Of course, nobody wants a bigger budget and more money coming out of their taxes. Of course not. But that's just an overly simplified conversation.
Yeah.
So the fiscally responsible thing for us to do was actually to have some budget increases, because there was services for the community that had a long history of being chronically underfunded. Sure. And that includes your assets, and that's a temporary game that you can do that, and then eventually you get a big bill.
Yeah, kick the can down the road.
Yeah. And so to answer your question there, Joel, yes, people being elected, good people, having grown up conversations was a huge component of it. But there was a lot of work that had to happen also with council, and council just gives the orders, and then staff had to go and deliver. And thankfully, the people that had remained were very committed to the city of Nanaimo. Obviously, you can imagine you've gone through this terrible period. And we were also able to turn that quite negative story to a lot of people want to be part of something that's up and coming and some energy. And so able to utilize that to, I think, attract some really good people and rebuild the ranks. And I think we saw that start to translate year 3 and year 4 to some really great things happening for the community.
Very cool.
During the election campaign, was this kind of what your pitch was, that righting the ship, or how did you go about that conversation during the election?
I think, yeah, for some folks that ran and did get elected, that was very much their messaging. For me, I had some really strong ideas of what, and you guys know, once you get to the table, that's a negotiation. But I had some really strong ideas where I thought the community should go, and things that I thought we needed to be delivering on or supporting. And so I ultimately ran on those ideas, and thankfully was successful.
The second time you ran, how did those ideas shift, or how did the pitch shift in terms of your election platform or what you're talking about during the election?
Yeah, some of it was unfinished business. I felt maybe about 20% was unfinished business. There were some items that I felt that were important to me that I didn't act upon. There was other items that I just knew weren't going to get acted upon. I had taken my chance, and wasn't able to convince the council table, and that's how that goes.
Yep.
And then I think so it was kind of a combination of, okay, there's about 20% of things that I want to make sure that at least I use my voice to try to get them to happen. And then the other thing was, I just really felt some good things in motion, but they probably need a couple more years of stewardship to get to the finish line. Sure. And ultimately it was that factor that kind of said, okay, I'm willing to put my name forward for another term.
Sure.
Maybe also holding back the people that are at the gates ready to turn the council back into chaos again.
Absolutely. And, I'm not saying it's necessarily a wrong vision, but there was people running that had a contrary vision for the community. And I felt that if I had helped put things in motion one way, I should be part of almost a referendum through an election of, hey, community, do you still think these values are what you want to see through? If not, that's the community's choice. Mm-hmm. And if you do, I'm willing to put in another term to try to help steward those.
Sure. That idea of running again as a referendum on what you're doing during your first term is, I think, a noble or honorable way to go about that conversation. There was someone on our council who said that kind of very thing, why he put his name forward again to run again, is because he wanted the community to be able to essentially say, we're supportive of what you're doing and the direction you're taking things, and putting himself out there again to kind of give that referendum.
Exactly. And that's how things ultimately happen. And that's how things, the community makes choices. And you guys know that when you get to the council table, you're one voice, and you try to make a decision in accordance with your values, and whether the information is present, you feel like you're comfortable making a decision one way or the other. And, sometimes it doesn't go your way. You're on the minority side. And in those cases, you may think you're right. Like you might think,
objectively.
You may think you're right, but you should actually probably be hoping that you're wrong, because a choice has been made. Sure. And you got to say, okay, hopefully the collective wisdom here of this group has made the right decision for the community, even if I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's a bit about the being elected, but then you did pretty quickly become chair. I mean, first term, right? You're already chair in the first term of the regional district, right?
Correct. It was for the final 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. So halfway through your first term, you end up chair, and you're the one who's in a very different role of, instead of just being there to kind of put your hand up and put your arguments forward and try to convince the council of things, you're now kind of steering the conversation at the board table. Do you want to maybe get a little bit into how you tackled that and what experience you brought to that? Or did you chair things before? Or were you a strata council president or something?
So I had a little experience in it was a very different experience chairing the Nanaimo Board of Variance.
Okay.
But I think that was maybe a year before I was elected, and I just did that for a year. I was on the Board of Variance a little longer than that. But like I said, I had sort of developed a passion for local government, and by that point, I was obviously participating in City of Nanaimo meetings. I'd been watching them for a while, participating as a director at the RDN level, and watching a whole host of other council meetings about throughout the island. And
seems like you're watching the what not to do, maybe mainly, or
Both.
were you learning the right things?
yeah, so I started to kind of develop a theory in my head that I didn't think we as elected officials were being onboarded with the right tools. We were being a lot of our trainings developed by technocrats or bureaucrats, and I don't use that term disparagingly. I think like to reclaim that as actually a positive term. That's what you are. But that is not what the role of governing is. And so I think there's a tendency when the folks that are developing these training programs is like, oh, we need to give them a base level of technical skill, a technical understanding, technical knowledge of what planning is, what budgeting is, and all. And of course that is true, right? We need to have a level of knowledge, but that's ultimately not the tool set that you need for collaborating and having good governance and making decisions and dealing with the pressures of the role. The pressures of the role aren't from the jerks that are lobbing stuff at you here and there. Okay, enough of them. Yeah, it starts to get annoying and might eat at you a little bit. We're all human. We all have insecurities. But the pressure of the role comes from someone that you really felt was your friend, and you made one decision and now they don't want to talk to you.
Sure, yeah.
Right? Someone that you felt like you had a lot of values together, and now they're the ones that are posting smack about you on social media like they've never met you.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
That stuff creates pressure.
Sure.
And it doesn't feel good. And so you take that all with regular people, with all our regular flaws and insecurities. You put them in an environment where there's a lot of pressure, a lot of peer pressure, where you have to collaborate and negotiate to achieve things for your community. And
A little healthy dose of ego, maybe, as well.
Absolutely. No, I think even the most people that think they're most humble, I'm like, you still think you should be making decisions for the community.
Just you can be the humblest person in the world, but if you're running for political office, there's some
I can't help it that
level.
I'm right all the time. It's not my fault.
Exactly. Yeah. So you take all that, and of course there is a lack of technical knowledge for the most part. And that's a situation that I think takes time to work through. But I find that a lot of training, I think there is some out there, and it's becoming more and more common. I think that's a good thing. But
Tune into Non-Partisan Hacks. Oh.
Good governance and decision making, and how to deal with the stress and how to deal with the pressure and operate in that environment isn't part of the regime like it should be. And I think those are the most important skills. So all that to say, I felt that our board, this was COVID, so it was an added layer of stress.
Right. Yeah.
I felt that our board needed some guidance and some stewardship, not through me, but through developing systems and ways of working with each other and processes. And I want to be careful with that, because processes, I think, can sometimes stand in the way of good governance, and we often think it's the tool to solve it all. But I felt like we were a little bit untethered in our decision making. Sure. We were a little bit aimless, and we weren't having a staffing body that was capable of helping us navigate that. And that ultimately was the impulse to, and then, add in 19 personalities and all that. That was the impulse where I thought, maybe there's something here that I can provide, both with being fortunate enough to have opportunity around knowledge of local government and some of the more technical aspects of it, but also at that governance level, and trying to figure out how we navigate all of our personalities to come together, because society was fracturing at that point. Mm-hmm. What happens if we went counter to that and actually started to deliver on the things we said we were going to deliver? That might help heal some of the conflict that was out there.
Sure. Just to give our listeners a little bit of background, the Regional District of Nanaimo has operating budget of around $180 million. And there's, somewhere between 318 full-time staff and 169 temporary. So it's much smaller than, say, the city of Vancouver. It's smaller than Metro Vancouver Regional District, but for the Island Regional District of Nanaimo is pretty big. You have 19 people who are sitting at the table. Some are elected directly to that board as electoral area directors, but many are appointed. Say 8 of those 19 are appointed from the city of Nanaimo. And so it's a very diverse group spanning a gigantic geographic area, and electoral area directors operate a little bit differently than a municipal director, because we come from already operating a budget within a city, and then the electoral area directors that is their governance when they come to that table. So it's a very tricky mix to try to chair, and that's the role you took on. I just want to kind of give our listeners a little bit of a background on shaping that.
Yeah, and the chair ultimately functions as the role of the mayor, but they're elected by their peers every year. And so that's sort of a unique item that I actually think it's a really healthy item.
Yeah.
But I actually think municipalities should go that way.
Well, I agree. A little side tangent is I was watching a meeting I was in Washington State for a basketball tournament for my son, and I was like, hey, this is a really nice community. They must have a good council. So I watched some of their council meetings, and yeah, they just run for council, and then the council votes on who of them will be chair. And that seems to me like a good way to go. That's how the regional district works.
Yeah. And people, when I first was elected chair, people told me you won't last in the seat unless you pander. Right. Oh. And I have to say my experience is fundamentally the opposite of that, because I kind of decided pretty early on that if that was the case, I don't think the role was for me. Yeah. And that's fine. Happily.
What would you rather do, pander or be chair?
Yeah.
You can't pander to everyone anyway, so I don't even know what that means, that pander to.
Well, you need to make sure that at least half the people are happy with you so you can secure enough votes. Actually, I will use, through being chair, I got to a much more closer relationship with the previous Parksville mayor, Ed Main.
Sure.
And Brian Weiss in Qualicum. Ed and I think we would both agree politically. We don't agree on a lot.
Sure.
But we had a lot of great conversations.
Sure.
At the table, we didn't agree on items. But Ed and I were able to talk and work through issues. And the second time that I put my name was put forward for chair, I was nominated for chair, was by Ed.
Sure.
And so I think that shows just a little bit
how effective the pandering was.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think to Ed's credit, I think, and this is what I think the right is actually, I think they're often criticized, and because we have this idea of what the right is, but I think I find in my experience anyways, the right side of things is actually can be very tolerant of divergent opinions and still have very heated conversations and still say, yeah, I'm happy with the job you're doing. Keep it up.
Soft on people, tough on
yeah,
boss.
And obviously that's broad strokes, but I think about that often. And all the credit to Ed there, because he's an example in my mind of someone where again we have very diverging political views on a lot of issues. But he was a very supportive guy, and that means a lot when you're in those positions. So.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that local government people should strive for is, even if they don't support what they decided to do, they should at least support the process that they went through to arrive at the decision they arrived at. So don't judge me based on necessarily which way I voted on things, but do judge me on how seriously I took that vote and how much I thought through it, and the lenses I applied to it, and the empathy hopefully that I take to each of those votes, as opposed to you can have the person doing the right quote unquote vote on a number of things for the completely wrong reasons, whether it is pandering or whether it is because they're super ideological on some topic. So I think that speaks to your process and how you go about making decisions. And I've known you to be someone that does really think through things on their own merits, as opposed to, oh, well, how does this fit into some grand ideology, or which a lot of people do.
Yeah. And it's tough. There's a lot of topics, and we're often asked to make decisions with incomplete information.
Yeah.
I don't have any hair, but we could pull our hair out, with the desire to have complete information, and ultimately we're never going to get it. And that's where I think ultimately it comes down to grace with ourselves on those decisions. Yes. And grace with others is that at the, at the 19 people, that's a very lot of, forget about, you got suburban, urban, and rural and different size urbans. That's, that's a huge factor. But you have 19 different people with very different life experiences, very different capacities, very different expertise, whether it's professional or personal, and very different personalities. And so that's where you have to be, have some humility and have some grace towards yourself and to others, because you're going to make mistakes. Other people are going to make mistakes. And you're dealing with a lot of information and it's incomplete.
Yeah.
So how do you prepare for those meetings? Like when you stepped into that role as chair, how did you go about getting yourself ready to be on the hot seat there? I mean, the meeting is dependent on you. So
for 4 hours, 5 hours,
those meetings can get quite long and people can get tired after a while and people their filters go away a little bit. Like, how do you prepare for those meetings? And then how do you keep them kind of on the right track?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that, yes, the chair has a special role or the mayor has a special role, but it's the duty of everybody to take responsibility for the meeting that you have as a collective.
Love that one, yeah.
And so
chairs always like to say that one.
Well, I think it's important we remind everybody, because we need to regulate ourselves like grown-ups, especially on the ones that we're really passionate about.
Yeah.
It's not the simple things that get away from us as individuals or the ones that we're like, kind of indifferent to us. The ones we're highly passionate about and we feel a certain level of attachment to decisions. So I think that it's an important reminder for everybody that, hey, we're all responsible for this meeting. And once that item's done, we're moving on to a next.
Yep.
But I think, when people say, oh, you run a good meeting, that's because that's what they see is the meeting. To run a good meeting, I think it's all the work in the background.
Sure.
It's knowing what is important to the individuals at the table. And part of that for me was watching Parksville meetings, watching Qualicum meetings, watching the Electoral Area Services Committee meetings, not as a presence, but just as an observer.
So do you have a scouting staff that does this?
I wish.
He was doing it all himself.
This is sounding like sports now, where you watch the other team and see what the players' strengths and weaknesses are.
It's homework, yeah.
Yeah, and so, I know, okay, Parksville had a bad meeting last week. They were very divided on this issue. It might rear its ugly head at the table. So how do we prepare for that? How do I prepare for that? It's knowing that this director really cares about this park. Knowing that, I think prevents or helps mitigate kind of being sandbagged and something coming out of left field.
Less surprises.
Even if you don't share it with the table, right? It's just something I think the other thing is that where I think things really go in a not good direction is when you have a majority or you have a chair or a mayor who wants to control the spectrum of debate or dialogue or the things that get to the table.
Sure, yeah.
Because that might have some near-term benefit of, hey, we're moving through things quickly. Yeah. The problem with that is we all want to be heard. I don't think we go to the table expecting everyone's going to agree with us, but we feel that we need to be heard. And if folks start not feeling heard or they're not being guided to the correct place to bring forward, or they feel there is no way for an item to be brought forward, everything is going to become a proxy or an indirect battle for that item.
Right.
And now
Collateral damage.
And that's when personalities start to conflict, tensions rise, and everyone's kind of at the table like, what the hell are we even talking about anymore?
And it's an underlying thing that.
Yeah. I thought we were doing third reading for a zoning amendment.
And yeah, exactly. and then it's every item. And, maybe that's an exaggeration, but it's most items and you can see people's body language, their facial expression. So if you see that coming or that coming, talking through with that person and saying, hey, look, I don't have to agree with this. I think the board might vote against this 18-1, but there's a report coming in a month from now. Can you wait? Because that would be the appropriate place. And I never had anyone say, no, I can't wait 4 weeks. Or, hey, I don't see anything on the horizon. I think notice of motion might be your only opportunity. Okay, they know now they can get it to the table. They're not feeling that angst that, hey, this really matters to my constituents and I'm doing nothing. And so I think it's that work in the background that translates to good meetings. And often I think we think of good meetings as short ones. And I do think there's an element of truth to that. If they start to get too long, you need to ask yourself, are we debating the right things? Mm-hmm. But contrast efficiency, I think, with effectiveness. And effectiveness is you're not spending items on things that are 19-0, everybody agrees. Mm-hmm. And you are spending debate on things that are deserving of debate. And so that's what I tried to keep in my head. It was, okay, are we having effective meetings? And sometimes, based on the agenda, that might be a 60-minute meeting.
Yeah.
Other times it might be a 3-hour meeting, but we all walked away feeling like, oh yeah, that thing deserved that length of conversation. The other thing is trying to remind people of their tools. We're feeling like we're spinning our wheels on an item. There's some good debate happening, but now we're kind of repeating, but we're not getting closer to decision. Can we defer this to the next meeting? Let's take 2 weeks, come back. We might feel differently. We might still feel the same, but now we've given ourselves the time and space. Or, and in the case of the pool for District 69, it felt like we were spending a lot of time on that item, but not actually advancing any important conversation. And that conversation ultimately needs to lead to a decision. Hey, let's take away the people that this really matters to and see if we can get to a deal or an agreement.
Separate subcommittee.
Separate. And ultimately that proved effective. It took a little longer than I thought it might. Spilled over into an additional term, but we got there. And to me, that's an effective use of the tools that I think we often forget. And it's really easy to forget in the heat of the moment when you're like, we're going to have a vote. Hey, can we just defer this? Most people, if they're feeling the same, okay, right?
Yeah, fresh eyes.
You mentioned sort of talking to individual members of the council or board. Are you doing a fair bit of that in the background, or is that mostly just you've kind of thought through where they might stand on some of the more hot button agenda items? How does that go?
Some directors spending a couple hours with them every week.
Wow. Okay.
At times, right? If there's a hot issue in their community, they've got something to try to work through. I think it's twofold. It's about making sure their issues represented well, making sure they don't feel alone, even if you don't agree. I think especially for electoral areas where you are the director, I think it's very important to provide support so they don't feel alone, especially when they're under a lot of pressure. And working with the individuals to trying to make sure their item is heard, even if you don't agree. Even if I know, hey, I already knew it was 18-1. I know where this is going, but you got elected to use your voice and you think this is how you want to use it. Yeah. Great.
The chair spends time with them, helps them maybe frame it a little bit differently. So maybe it might land better with the board.
Or work with staff through an item, especially if there might be, some disagreement with how staff are approaching an item. That's where I think, again, time spent can help navigate that. Other directors, you kind of just know that if they've got an item, they're going to call you. You're probably not going to hear from them a whole lot. It doesn't mean they're unhappy. Occasional check-in, and you know that relationship's good. Ultimately, I think when you're in that role, there is an element of like your relationship is kind of as good as your last handshake. So you want to make sure you're checking in, not checking out. Like really, I think that's crucial for that role. But it's also recognizing the different individuals and also the different roles between municipalities and electoral areas.
Definitely.
And, yeah. Mm-hmm. Sean or Joel, like I know if you guys have an issue, probably someone on your council is the first person you go to. An EA director might go to another EA director, but ultimately they are alone in their area, right? So,
and for those people who are listening who don't exactly know what electoral area director is, maybe you're listening for the rest of Canada. Electoral area directors have, it often feels like less power than an incorporated or municipality incorporated area. And so I've seen a lot of frustration for them. I kind of call them underpowered mayors. They kind of should be a mayor of their area, but that's just not how regional districts are here in British Columbia. And so that can be very frustrating to feel like I've been elected over this area, but I don't really have the same tools that an incorporated area has. And that's why we often see governance studies where that electoral area director is bringing it to the province and saying, hey, this situation doesn't feel like it's working. And so you as chair are balancing those electoral area directors with those municipal directors, and they kind of have a different setup between those two. There's a little bit of background.
Yeah, and ultimately, like EA directors are only allowed to vote on one thing, or electoral area directors are only allowed to vote on one thing by themselves.
Yeah.
And that's their alternate.
Yeah.
Everything else is, if there is a service area that is only one electoral area, the whole board votes.
The whole board, yeah.
Or anything else would be a shared participation. So whoever, regional districts are fundamentally pay to play. If you pay for a service, you get a vote.
Yeah, and that's a real challenge because you are one person with maybe the same population that voted for just you as the entire municipal member of that board, where they have a full council with staff that are specific to them, as opposed to an electoral director that doesn't have their own kind of personal staff like you might have. And speaking of staff, can you get into a little bit of how you work with staff effectively, having been on both sides of that relationship as a staff member and as an elected official and a board chair? How do you manage the dynamic between staff and elected, and sometimes their competing priorities?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I don't think priorities should ever be competing. If that's the case, there's a misalignment between, or first I would say there's a misunderstanding of each other's roles, and then there's a misalignment between the governing body and the implementation body. I think in local government, it often gets said, oh, you got to stay in your lane. And as soon as you say that, everyone's thinking, oh, elected officials need to stay in their lane. I think that's one side of the equation. I from my experience, there's also a lot of examples of where staff don't stay in their lane. And maybe probably one of the unique people in the province or maybe the country that can say this is, like, if you're unhappy as a staff member about the decisions that are being made, there is an avenue open to you, and that's you can run for office.
Yeah.
Like I did, says Tyler Brown.
So when I think we talk about staying in our lanes, it's decision makers should be decision makers. There's sometimes I see, I have seen a decision maker where I'm like, oh, you clearly wanted to be a parks planner. I'm sure there was a position open a couple years ago. So it goes both ways. So I think to navigate that healthily, everyone needs to be well educated on their roles. And there is going to be times, and I think this is where that kind of grace comes in for each other, not just elected official to elected official, but staff to elected official to staff, is there is going to be times where we know something is very hot in the community and the elected official is going to be under pressure, and there's going to be temptation to dip deeper into their role, into more of an operational role. That's where we just need to confront those feelings. And I think a good chair, a good mayor can help with that. And we can have that conversation of, okay, like, how do we figure this out together? I know the community doesn't want these benches faced this way, so let's talk about that. And is there a path forward? So for one, I think it's education. Two, it's about having that grace with each other.
General good life tip for sure.
Yeah. And then I think also there's a really important role for the CAO or senior team to understand that their role up until a decision is to give their best professional opinion. The governing body needs to understand that if they just want reports coming forward with their opinion, don't get staff. Save your community hundreds of thousands. If you're a small community or a large community like in Nanaimo, save yourself hundreds of millions of dollars per year, and don't have staff. If all you want to see is your own words and your own voice on a paper, save your community money.
Write your own reports.
Write your own reports. If you don't, and if you value expert and again, a little grace that sometimes it's going to be wrong, sometimes it's going to be a little incomplete, errors are made. Sure. But for the most part, people are doing pretty good jobs and want to do a good job.
And if they're not, then you've got a bigger problem, which is just to get new staff like you. And that starts with the CAO. Absolutely. And really that's where your relationship is as a board or as a council. Is your CAO is all you've got really as part of your accountability matrix. One employee model. So you hire the CAO, which is like the general manager of your team, and they set out the team below them, and you don't control what players are on the field. So you just have that CAO that you control.
Correct. And, and that's one model. It's the dominant model. It's not enshrined in legislation. The only thing you really have to have is a finance officer and a clerk. So there's other models, but the reason that model has been successful is because it creates it's more inclined to produce relationships that respect the domain of each body.
Sure.
That part of that equation is they're going to provide the best technical or professional advice up until you make a decision. And unless it's illegal or, kind of grossly unethical, then the role switches to implementation. And your senior team, especially your CAO, should absolutely understand that. And that's how they should function. Your board or your council should absolutely understand that and not feel bad or like they've made some big mistake if they vote against staff. The staff is one input. Now, I think if you're finding yourself where you're always voting against staff, that's where I think it begs those questions that you're talking about there, Joel, is like, okay, is the CAO reading the room? Is there good conversations happening? Is the CAO listening to direction? There's some harder questions sometimes in those scenarios, but for the most part, it's okay if you go against a staff motion, but most of the time when those bodies are functioning fairly well, there's a synergy there where you're going to find most of the time you're going with the staff recommendation. Sure. People see that as a bad thing, as baptizing.
Well, they do see, and that's weird to me, because if you don't generally default to giving a lot of weight to the staff recommended motion on something, then do you not have faith in your staff? And therefore maybe it's on you that you still have that staff.
Absolutely.
So it seems like a bit of a scapegoat to go after, not following staff or undermining staff or questioning what they're bringing to you. And it's not a cool way to go about it, in my opinion. And it's kind of just can be good politics, but it's not good governance.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction, right? You can have, I think you guys were talking about a little bit is like, good governance is often very boring.
Yeah, it should be.
It's like the Toyota Corolla. It's just like, it never breaks down, but it gets you where you're going, right? Nothing sexy, but it's going.
We're not making the news.
No.
Yeah, ideally not, right? If you're making the news, it's usually because something is going sideways, and good government should be steady Eddie, heading towards slowly towards that destination and not charting these crazy paths that go weaving one way or the other. With the staff, the staff elected dynamic, is there anything you see from having been on the staff side that you could speak to as regards to working with councils? You've talked a little bit about from the sort of council and the board table side. What about on the other side with staff?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think fundamentally there's a power dichotomy there that both sides need to respect, and that is there's a temptation to want to respond or in advance to where you think a conversation might be going.
Oh, okay.
Or, Councillor Wood's going to come with this perspective and Councillor Grenz is going to come with this perspective. So let's frame it like this. And it's not dishonest, but it's a framing. And my advice would be always shy away from that. Mm-hmm. If your council is so fragile that, like, ego-wise, that matters,
it's a bigger problem.
That's a bigger problem
than this one.
Yeah. That's actually an interesting point. I haven't really even thought about that, but definitely staff could be in a position where they're kind of being political themselves, right? Where
they're probably wondering, how is this report? How is this recommendation?
Yeah. How's this going to land?
To go? Yeah. When the meeting and the cameras are rolling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, there's times where I think, we're all people and we're like, this is a pretty good bunch of people. There might be a tendency to feel like you got to protect them. Frame things in a way that's going to, protect them from being slaughtered in the media, or try to make it so they don't make a terrible decision. And a good staff, like appropriate staff, wouldn't do that. It's also about respecting that people are elected to these roles to make the decisions themselves. And of course we want to provide good advice. Of course we want to provide guidance. But we got to be very, very careful in our framing and make sure it's factual where we know it's facts, or it's our best professional advice. And anything from that ultimately is a disservice to the respect for what it means to be a governing official. I think it's also a disservice to democracy or representative democracy itself, because you're taking away a little bit of that ability to make a decision, even if it's a foolish one. Our system is fundamentally built on the idea.
Yeah, you're
that,
allowed to make bad decisions.
Yeah.
And again, that goes to the process and not the outcome. Like I was sort of trying to say in some not super eloquent way earlier, the process should be done right. What comes out of that process is important for sure, but it's more important that we do the process correctly, and whatever comes out hopefully is the right thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the things that kind of I think about when you've got staff who have a council turning over or board turning over, new board comes in, new staff comes in. Or sorry, not new staff, same staff, new council or board. And you've already got all these things underway and all this cool stuff that you're working on. And new council comes in and they're like, well, we've got a new direction we want to take things in.
We're going to get rid of the park board.
How does that land with staff?
City of Vancouver. Sorry.
Again, that's a tough one because you might have a project you've been working on for several years. You've spent a lot of time, and of course you might feel really invested. It might be the best project in the world.
I mean, you're at like parties and you're telling people what you're working on.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, I'm working on this great new program. I'm so excited about it. New council comes along and they're like, yeah, well, that was nice, but we're reallocating those resources.
Yeah, I've been working on a shelter that's going to, once it's up and running, 30 people that don't have a place to stay, and then a new council is elected and it's axed, right? That can't be a good feeling. Again, though, that comes down to knowing your role. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry, right? We're all human. We all have these emotions. I think there's a role there to, if there's an opportunity to explain the project, to do so. Ultimately, you want staff that are passionate about delivering something, but if you're too attached that you can't let it go, if you're too attached that you're going to be upset with the governing body that made that decision, you're entering into a realm where the tyranny of your passions are going to start to override the fundamental principles of
your
democracy and your role, and then by extension, democracy. Because if you're starting to take away or feeling the impulse that I'm going to frame this differently, or I'm not going to give this information, that's very, very dangerous territory. And so it's hard. We're all, like I said, talking about the passionate councillor or the passionate board member before, where you're really attached to something. It's hard. We're all human. It sucks when something that you think is important doesn't go your way. Take a moment, reset, and then find how you're going to help the council. Ultimately, if you feel they're so off base, it's a drastic decision. You can no longer work there. And I get it. People have their lives. Those are hard decisions. Or you can run for council.
Like you get to make those decisions.
Yeah.
Tyler Brown's hot tip.
Yeah.
Just run for council then.
No, don't do it. Don't do it.
I mean, city staff.
for you.
City staff have taken a job where they know that at least every 4 years here in BC, there is going to be a new group at that table. And even during that term, when those people are at that table, you will see things shift. That's the job that you've taken as city staff, and it can be very frustrating, I'm sure. But a lot can happen at that table during the term or after, a new group is elected. That's the job. There's no surprises there.
And this is where, if you have a good senior team, they should be providing the guidance and the mentorship for those in the roles below them and the roles that report to them, because it can be hard. And those are the things that you expect your senior leadership to guide your staffing through and create the culture that guides it through. Again, if that's not happening, now you have some bigger questions to be asking. If we're thinking about the one employee model, the CAO model, the city manager model, it's important that at the end of every report, that CAO signature is there, because it's not just that staff person's project. It's the corporation's project. And so that person shouldn't feel alone when their project gets axed. And that's where I think that mentorship really needs to come in.
Nice.
Where I've come to so far in my own head is I get emotionally attached to making sure that the process is good more than the outcome, because I don't really have control of the outcome. But I feel like we can all have pretty good control of making sure that the process was really good. to get to that. And I know that the outcomes will a lot of times not be the one that I personally wanted. But if the process was really good up until that point, then I can be happy that that was the important part.
Yeah, and I think the key there, though, is the process was good.
Yeah.
Not just a process or a procedure, because I think that can be a danger, too, where it's, well, the process was fine, but we never did anything our entire term, and the community is no better for it.
We had lots of motions. We voted on lots of stuff.
At the end of the day, the process or the procedure has to serve the community.
Sure, of course.
And so impact over intent, right? And a bad process can lead to bad decisions.
Yes.
Good process can at times also lead to bad decisions. So is the process set up or the procedure set up where it's allowing everybody to feel confident in a decision? Then I think, we can say that's good.
We promised at the beginning that we would talk also about when council meetings are kind of the interface between the public and council, and when that kind of goes sideways. And that's something you've had to deal with a bit in your term, as many councillors do. Do you have any Tyler's tips on how to handle and navigate the challenges of the public sometimes?
Yeah, I think any tip I can provide is probably born out of mistakes more than anything. So
those are fun ones usually, aren't they?
Yeah. So you make enough mistakes. Hopefully you've learned something just not to do again. And Lord knows I've made a lot of mistakes. So I tend to think that when conflict emerges, it's obviously something people care about, and that should be respected. Even if you think that it's much ado about nothing. If it's got enough people hot under the collar or feeling passionate about something, it's worthy of your time, at least, to think about it and be curious about it. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it. I think it's very important for anyone that is tasked with the stewardship of a meeting, especially a public meeting, to lay the ground rules out at the beginning. This is why we're here. This is why we will behave a certain way. I think a key component of that is saying, we value diversity of opinions in these chambers. And if you conduct yourself in a manner that is aggressive or even causes one person to not feel like they should express themselves, you're violating the principle of these chambers, and that's that everybody's voice matters. And so I think most people can understand that. And even if you've laid those ground rules, it's very effective when someone's all of a sudden starting to lose control or becoming a little dysregulated. It's not because they don't care. It's actually because they do. They're so passionate about something. You just cut them off and to remind them of the ground rules and say, hey, if you carry on this way, I'm not going to be able to allow you to speak, because I'm worried that, the next person's not going to feel comfortable stepping up, or people at this table aren't going to feel comfortable expressing themselves to what they do is the right or a good decision. And so I think most people understand that.
And hey, down the street, they can go to the sports bar and yell at the TV there and cheer for their team and stuff. If that's what they want to do, there is a place where that is the ground rules, and you can do that. But in these chambers, there are different ground rules, and you can play by those.
Absolutely. And people say, it doesn't allow me to be heard. You've got a lot of opportunity to be heard. Most of the time you can be a delegation on an item if it's on the agenda.
Or your other tip you go to, you could run for office. You can run for office.
Yeah. You can hold that referendum with the community yourself. You can email. It's amazing how many people don't email. I'm not on social. I think it's just called social now.
Oh, is it? Oh,
yeah. They've dropped the media. I don't want to date myself there by calling it social media. Socials. I think there's pluralized.
The socials.
The socials. Not on there anymore. But I was always.
So you're anti-social?
Yes, but that's a different conversation.
Okay, different podcast.
Different podcast, yeah.
Phone calls, coffees. There's ways to reach out to council.
Oh, yeah, and it just always amazed me how many people would comment online and you never heard from them.
Yeah.
And there's like extreme examples of that, and that's really sad.
Yeah.
So, you have a lot of opportunity. So yeah, I think it just comes down to setting those ground rules. The chair has one of those little wood hammers. What are they called?
Gavel.
Gavel.
Yeah.
I had seen a chair that was very heavy with his gavel, and I knew right away I put it in the drawer, and I thought to myself, if I ever need that, I've already failed.
Yeah.
The meeting's out of control if you need to slam something to get people's attention back. Like,
Yeah.
if you got to that point, it's time to take a time
Recess.
out. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, recess seems like a more effective tool than a gavel any time of the day or any day of the week or whatever. Any meeting.
Any meeting. And also I think the other thing is, like, and this, I think this goes for a chair or mayor. If you got a problematic councillor or a problematic director, if you got a problematic member of the public over and over, talk to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't wait till the meeting to have a yelling competition. It's that, things just break apart at that point. And we're all human, right? It's a hard environment to be in. We tend not to like conflict. Some people do.
But that's what people forget too. And that's one of the problems, how these things arise, is people forget that the other person is a human, and even the person. So someone needs to break through that relationship and demonstrate to that individual, look, I'm a human, you're a human. We're just people. We're both members of this community. I happen to be one that stepped up into this role and to take on what you're doing to me right now, but I'm not different from you in any way. I'm just another guy that ran for council.
Yeah. I remember, like, before I ran, I was listening to a podcast, and it was, I think they were interviewing a senator. I want to say they were from Hawaii. I'm not sure if they were a state senator at that point, but I remember the podcaster asked him the question. It's like, what's the difference between people that are in office and those that aren't? And his answer was so simple. He's like, they just decided to run. It's like actually a very small percentage of people decide to run. And then
They actually ran. They didn't just talk about it. They actually did it. Key takeaway there for sure is try to remember the humanity and that we're all just trying to hopefully do the best for our community. Even the person that may be yelling, they presumably also think that what they're yelling about is going to improve their community.
Yeah.
One thing I keep in mind is, we've been elected to office in various roles, and we get to practice chatting with people and practice listening to issues and practice how someone is framing something and how those people are feeling at the time. And a lot of people haven't been elected to office, and they haven't spent a bunch of time in meetings with people dealing with, pretty important topics on how to spend money. And the tools that they have so far is to maybe rant online. That's like the tool that they go to. They don't even have the tools to, like, meet a stranger for coffee. It might be weird if they're going to meet someone who is in government for coffee. But if you can get them out to that coffee and chat with them, their defenses, what I've seen is, let's start to lower, and like, oh, it's just a person, like you were saying, Joel. And I felt, they felt good just leaving after having chatted at a coffee, because they got to say their stuff. They don't feel as angry. They felt listened to. And that's a lot different than just typing on a keyboard and on Facebook or something and leaving a comment. They feel like, I feel better just pressing return and ranting there. But they would actually feel better if they just reached out and chatted with us, and their message will land with us a lot better than however they kind of framed it on Facebook. But
Totally. It's easier to have a dialogue in person or on the phone.
Yeah.
Social media platforms, they may seem like real time, but they're not.
No.
They're, a comment is still a monologue, and you may be in response to someone, and there's some sort of semblance there of a conversation. But I think too often there's a tendency to just want to see your words in another person's mouth.
Yeah.
The way the filter bubble works, you get that. In the States, it was a Federalist paper number 10 talks about the difference of factions and things like that. I might have got the number wrong there.
I expect you to have the correct Federalist number.
Sure. And so I think with social media, I think that worked when everybody was geographically, in different areas. And you might find someone in your community that's got some similar views, but there was enough diversity there. Now online, it's like you can find, and then there is no factions. There's not enough diversity of opinions in the world that you're creating for yourself. And then, I think you kind of lose objectivity on the difference between righteousness and self-righteousness. And and I think that actually can happen at the political table too, with politicians, is we can start to lose perspective on, the bubbles we're creating and lose perspective on the difference between righteousness and self-righteousness. And I think, there's a danger there too. But anytime you start to find yourself in an insulated environment, that risk emerges. And the way that creeps up on you is in a way that you're not aware. right? It's like, oh, okay, people seem to be agreeing with me. I must be right.
Echo chamber.
Yeah, and then it can lead to a very dangerous place. And so I think online is a breeding ground for that, and it's a huge problem.
Yeah, and maintain curiosity is probably the lesson there, as hard as that can be sometimes, right?
Open mind.
Yeah.
So the last thing we want to chat about with you is the rules of the game. So Local Government Act is what it is. It sets out a whole bunch of ways we operate in local government, but these rules of the game, like any sport, should evolve a bit with the times and with the changing style of players. What do you think about the future of local government, and what tweaks would you like to see?
There's a lot of legislation actually that governs local governments in British Columbia, but the two main pieces of legislation for a lot of the day-to-day stuff is the Community Charter for municipalities and the Local Government Act. Now, the Community Charter was brought in, I think, early 2000s, like very early 2000s. First started under the BC Liberals, I think, when they were in opposition, and then Premier Campbell came in, and that's when they brought in the Community Charter. That was originally supposed to be a 3-part project, the modernization of the legislation. The second part was supposed to be a Regional District Act or an act concerning regional districts. And then finally, planning matters, I believe, were going to be kind of their own separate act, because they are a pretty crucial component of Local Government Act or local government. So unfortunately, due to a few factors, I believe scandal was one of them, but this is non-partisan hacks, so we won't.
We only got one part of what we were supposed to get, I guess.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, no government since has sort of taken on that ambition, and I think to a lot of credit to the BC Liberals at the time, it wasn't just that. They brought in a lot of really cool legislation. Very before their time in a lot of things. So the Community Charter is like a wonderful piece of legislation. It gives municipalities a lot of tools to adapt to the items in their community. It's got a lot of checks and balances, which is, I think, very important in enabling legislation. It's very well written. It's very clear, fairly easy to understand. Of course, as you go through time, it gets interpreted through the courts, and to be expected. But it's a clean piece of legislation. Local Government Act's got a lot of legacy items, and that's the one that ultimately governs regional districts. And I think there's problems do emerge because of that legislation is not as adaptable and flexible as the Community Charter. Now, I say that, but I think with kind of a little bit of caution, because regional districts aren't meant to be municipalities. And I think there's often a desire that they should be, and they ultimately are not. They're a different tool or a different way of governing, and that is because there's huge unincorporated areas that make up huge geographical areas, and they're set up in a manner that allows for collaboration. And I think there's areas in where those tools can be built better. I think there's some tools in the Community Charter that should be imported for regional districts. Here we are in an unincorporated area, and it's very close to a municipality. There's probably no tree cutting bylaw and things like that, where ultimately it's functioning in a very similar way to a municipality in terms of built pattern, but it doesn't have those same tools. It doesn't have the ability for sidewalks and those kind of things. So I don't think that...
Or apparently pothole repair.
Pothole repair, yeah. So, that service area delivery and that fractured jurisdiction can become kind of problematic. And so, there's even kind of these absurd scenarios where, so for folks that probably don't know this, they wouldn't ever need to know this in most of their regular lives, is like when it comes to things like subdivision of parcels, you have to have an approving officer. And the approving officer is kind of like an independent body from a council, so in municipalities, they're appointed. It's usually a staff member, not always. It can be a contractor, but they're appointed, and they ultimately finalize a subdivision. It's sort of a depoliticized process. In the electoral areas, it's the province has the approving officers.
Yeah.
So a few years ago, they modified the legislation. They said, okay, regional district can have approving officers if they request it. And so, you have your legislation and you have your regulations, and that's how ultimately the provincial government governs. And so they developed this enabling legislation. I think one regional district even posted an ad to hire an approving officer. The province never followed through with actually developing the regulations that would allow that to happen.
Still have never hired one.
Yeah, so you got this weird hanger.
This legislation that doesn't actually do anything.
Wow.
So that's one example. Tree cutting bylaw is another example. These may seem like very boring things, but when you start to take them as a whole, it can create problems. The other one I think is sometimes taxation can create a little bit of problems around, like once you have service areas, how do you kick someone out? How do you get someone out that doesn't want to be in that service area anymore? How do you include someone that should be in it but
Doesn't want
to? Those type of items, I think there's some room for improvement, and that's where you can really borrow from, I think, the success of the community charter to create a more collaborative framework, which would support regional districts. And what I think is their original intent is that collaborative spirit for a region, without going the full way and sort of making them municipalities.
Just basically like a super municipality with not the best kind of representation within it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the other thing that's eventually going to have to be looked at is like voting structures. In some places they work fine under the original intent. I think Regional District of Nanaimo is one where it starts to be like, there's a tension there between representation by population. You have Nanaimo, that now has significantly over half of the population of the Regional District of Nanaimo. They have 8 seats. They eventually will have a 9th. They won't be able to appoint an alternate. You might get funky and reduce the unit counts and thresholds, and maybe Nanaimo goes to 7 or keeps that at 8. But at the end of the day, you're really starting to skew the representation by population. So there's no easy answer there. And those are the items where I think you can start to, what happens if you had 2 representatives for an EA or larger areas? I think people will push back and say, oh, it's too far away from your communities, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, you're not municipalities. And at the end of the day, also, they're not fiefdoms. It's a regional federation. Some people don't like it when that's said, but that's what it is. And that's it by design.
Does the province prefer that those regions would incorporate, though? Is that kind of the hope from the province's perspective?
I don't think the province really has a
Doesn't
hope.
really care either way.
Yeah, like
even like the subdivision thing. How does that even happen? The province is like, oh, boom, there goes a whole new subdivision there, and have fun, guys.
yeah, obviously there's regulations and guidelines that govern it all. But at the end of the day, regional districts were established with the electoral areas is because MLAs didn't want to deal with certain issues. Right? It's like, it's kind of a weird thing to be like dealing with legislation that governs significant mines that benefit the province or Canada, and then also being like, oh, now I got to take a call from my constituent about
roads,
it.
potholes.
Yeah, potholes.
Yeah.
So, they're trying to get away from that. And I think rightfully so. It's trying to acknowledge that there are local issues, there are regional issues, there's population discrepancies, but there's provincial issues. And, we can go further and say there's federal issues. And, and I think, unfortunately, those spheres have blended probably more. I hate going to UBCM because it's like, I don't want to debate federal policy at the microphone.
Yeah.
It's like, if you wanted, okay, there is some overlap, don't get me wrong. We can talk about taxation and all that sort of thing. There's things that absolutely are worth debating, but it's like, that some items I'm like, that's purely a provincial item. You should have ran for MLA.
Yeah. And I feel that kind of ebbs and flows a little bit, and maybe it flows more when an election's about to come up, because most people don't get a lot of engagement. I think running on the bread and butter in your lane issues for local government, it's not that sexy, right? You're going to have a lot more fun getting people worked up about more provincial issues or federal issues and getting them motivated to vote around that.
Yeah, so like, you're not going to get elected by developing a bylaw enforcement policy and making that part of your platform, or like heat pumps got to be 1.2 meters away from side property. Like, nobody cares about that.
I'm running because I want to ensure that every property setback is 5 centimeters larger than it is now. Like, that's what some of the stuff is that you're actually going to be doing, but it doesn't really get people enthusiastic to support your campaign. And that's I think a real challenge around this.
Nobody runs for office to vote on variance for heat pumps or whatever it is. Yeah.
Although it sounds like you may be a little bit got into that.
No, not even. Obviously, I know that stuff from my planning days, but it's like, it's boring. It's like, it really matters to one person, maybe the neighbor.
Well, on that note, I think it's probably a good place to leave it. Tyler, really, really appreciate you coming on to talk with us. I really appreciate the way you think about these issues and the empathy you bring to your processes. And I think it's something that's kind of lacking sometimes out there in the political sphere. And so that's why we do this podcast. We really want to, it can be some boring topics, but good governance, as we talk about, should be boring. It should be about these details. It should be about the processes. And it should be about good people thinking in good faith about how to do the best for their community. And you're a good example of that. So I really appreciate you coming on and the work you do on all the different facets of your local government portfolio.
Well, thank you. I'm a work in progress, but thank you.
We're all a work in progress, Tyler, but really appreciate your time. You have a extreme depth of knowledge on so many things, along with experience, along with wisdom, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show with us today.
Well, thank you guys, and I just want to say your podcast is great. I hope you keep it up because we need more Toyota Corollas in local government.
Dependable, reliable, not flashy, just good governance.
If you've got a guest suggestion, a good government story, or just want to share what's going on in your community, hey, visit our website, nonpartisanhacks.com.
Please remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you'll never miss another episode. Until next time, take care of yourself
and your community.
Windsor Plywood in French Creek specializes in hard-to-source interior and exterior home finishing products, including flooring, doors, and moldings. Windsor Plywood French Creek carries high-quality, responsibly sourced products and are committed to providing outstanding value and personalized one-on-one service to all of our customers: homeowners, do-it-yourselfers, renovators, builders, designers, craftsmen, and contractors. Regardless of the type or size of your project, Windsor can help you bring your vision to life from start to finish. Let Windsor Plywood in French Creek help you with your renovation, new build, or building project. Call 752-3122.